Thank you all for being here. My name is Christy Gonin, and I work here as the freshman transition coordinator. So I work almost exclusively with freshmen, but one of the things that I've noticed is that our freshmen are pretty stressed. And so I'm super happy that we have Rachel here today. We want, of course, our students to work hard and to do well here, but we also want them to have a good time and to enjoy their high school experience. And so I think that they really need our support and our strategies for how they're going to cope with the stress that they're managing, and so that they can be successful here. So Rachel is a South parent, as am I. So not only do I work here, but I have kids here, so I have lived it and breathed this experience along with you. She is also a local counselor here, and so she's going to give all of her wisdom to us. So please welcome Rachel Cazavilan. Oh, you did it.
Thank you. Yes, Christy's right. I'm a South parent. That's kind of my first role. And this has kind of been an interesting season of transition for me professionally. For the previous almost 5 years, I have had a small private practice, and I've been working at the YMCA running the therapeutic mentoring program for kids there, a national program there, and one of, just mentoring is a kind of a love of mine, recruiting and training folks in the community, volunteers, to essentially be pseudo-counselors to kids who probably don't have access to those services or not as easily accessible. Services are not to them, so that's been kind of amazing, and I've gotten to pair that with this work. I've also had done some adjunct professing at the U of O teaching sports nutrition. So when I was in grad school, I went through a nutrition certification at the same time, and have slowly collected some personal training certifications. And so in my private practice that I'm now doing full time, I use diet and exercise in my treatment with patients. It's something that I've been super passionate about for years, and always knew I wanted to be a therapist. Pretty much always knew I wanted to be a therapist. My entire adult life knew I wanted to be a therapist, but knew that there was this connection that many practitioners weren't super clued into. We're lucky enough, we live in a pretty earthy, crunchy part of the world, and so we're lucky enough to be in a place where that is much more widely accepted and understood and appreciated, that there's this connection, and that investing in our physical health can have some pretty remarkable benefits for our mental health, and investing in our mental health can also have some pretty significant benefits to our physical health as well. So that's kind of my background, and that's it's important for you to know that, because we're going to spend some time talking about those connections. So I have a couple of really fantastic interns from the psychology department at U of O, and we kind of racked our brains and searched the internet for ways to sort of break ice and create some discussion that wasn't super cheesy, and we didn't find any. But I'm not going to make you do all of that, but I am going to try to keep this time together super interactive. So I actually really don't like and enjoy public speaking, but I love talking and I love having conversations. So, as much as we can, I don't want to keep you here all night. I could talk about this stuff forever. So I will, try to keep the conversation moving, but I totally invite some interaction. For some of us, some people are really comfortable talking about mental health issues and concerns in their families to anyone and everyone, and some really are not. So, that's okay. I'm sensitive to that as well. But for those who would like to participate, you are encouraged and welcomed to do that. So I want to just start out by kind of creating some noise and taking the pressure off of me a little bit, and letting you kind of turn and just having a brief discussion. I'll time it, you've got 90 seconds, to answer these 2 questions. So as a high schooler, one thing that I did that made me a healthier student, and the reverse, as a high schooler, one thing that I did that perhaps compromised my health. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that, and there are no rules to this. This is, mental health, physical health, but just kind of the first thing that pops in your mind that, like, this was a healthy activity or pattern or behavior, and this was not so much. And then I'll let you just kind of discuss the ones yourself. So is there anyone that's kind of comfortable enough, brave enough to share? You have to share your own, you can't share your neighbors. That's their right to privacy, but what did we throw out? I heard somebody, I don't really know where it came from, but I heard someone talk about playing an instrument. Is there an instrument? Yeah, that was you. Yeah, so I assume that was in the healthy category?
Yeah. I was saying how so many students are kind of forced by their parents to play. I'm a music teacher now, so I can play an instrument, and so I quit when I was in 6th grade, but then I kind of missed my instrument. I played the piano mainly, and so I took it back as my own through middle and high school, and it became my stress relief, I think, and my way of procrastinating.
Okay, all right. Fair enough. Anything else? What else? What were some of the things that popped into your head as healthy?
Community service, volunteering, helping other people.
Why did you do that?
I don't know. Well, my mom actually, she would pull us into nursing homes when we were little kids, and she would dress us up like clowns, and she would play music, and we would dance and sing and entertain the elderly people. It was awesome.
How old were you?
I was like 4.
Okay, yeah, so too young to
high school.
4 or 5, but
I didn't care.
Yeah,
It was fun.
yeah, I love that. Any other healthy stuff? What popped in your mind? Sleep?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Teenagers know how to sleep. Usually, right? Yeah. All right, so the less than healthy category, what was like a... Did you all share about that? Or yeah.
I didn't get a chance to share, but I'll say the unhealthy thing I did. I skipped lunches all the time because I was very busy with all kinds of extracurricular activities, and I would get working on my homework late at night, and then I'd have to go to bed, and I would be finishing homework or cramming for a test. So I'd skip lunch every day.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. I'm so glad you said that. We're going to talk about that. Anything else? What else?
Eating junk.
Eating junk? Okay. Yeah. Kids can also be really good at that too. We might talk about why. What else? Anything else?
Staying up too late.
Staying up too late, yeah. Not sleeping. Partying.
I'll share one. Marijuana.
Yeah. Smoking. Yeah. Okay, you're all so good at this. I think we're done. Okay, so I appreciate that. I think one thing I kind of meant to sort of start out with, and maybe I'll sort of remind us periodically, is that, there's this really important key factor whenever we're having discussions about health, and that is vital individuality. And the individuality of our environments, our genetics. So I'm speaking in really broad strokes out of necessity, and hoping that there's some, that it resonates, that certain things will resonate with some, but not believing that everything I'm going to say is relevant to, you or your kids. But there is a collective sort of teen health and particularly mental health crisis that we seem to be in as a country right now. And there's lots of kind of whispers and murmurs about, what is contributing to that. I kind of put together a little list, and I asked some of my kids and my kids' friends, but academic expectations. That's not different than when we were all growing up. There were probably academic expectations on us, but there seems to be something different. Our kids feel like they're expected to be really good at everything. And I don't remember feeling like that. Yeah.
Well, I remember when my daughter started ninth grade here. She came home and she said, "Oh my gosh, I don't know where I'm going to college. Everybody knows where they're going to college." And I'm like, really? I mean, it starts so young now.
Yeah.
And that whole pressure, of course, you use IHS, which is even more pressure. But I was shocked that she came home and said that. Like, really?
Yeah. I heard a group of middle school girls talking about their college plans a few weeks ago.
That's
And,
crazy.
and there's an aspect to that that's just dreaming and talking, and we encourage that, and we want kids to have kind of this forward thinking and not get stuck in, because this is not going to last forever. It's not going to probably last very long at all. But there seems to be kind of a pointed stress academically that has shifted even over the last 10 years. Hormones. They are little and some of them giant hormone torpedoes. And this is something that I think as parents often, maybe we're kind of past that long enough that we forget what that's like, but that's a challenge to balance. Social pressure and a desire for community. There's a basic human need of wanting community around you. Even, kids who seem to be less interested in, big groups of friends. I find a lot in my work that the kids who maybe have even sort of isolated themselves are really desiring having, people around them. And there are other barriers to that, but it's not for a lack of wanting. And combined with an underdeveloped, not yet developed brain, the decisions that kids make because they're motivated to build a community sometimes aren't the most favorable. Family dynamics and personality clashes. The day our children are born, they begin to autonomize from us. They start, the whole kind of plan for their growth is to get away from us as parents. And sometimes by the time they're 16, they are pretty convinced that they're done, that they're fully independent and they've completely autonomized. And there's a biological, urge for kids, and in some it's stronger than others, to really be free of parenting. And we know that most 16-year-olds are probably not totally ready to be done, and to kind of move out from the covering of parents, and that in and of itself creates a stress. We'll call it a stress for now. Extracurricular activities. There's no shortage, and again, there's some really positive, really beneficial aspects to having, like the world be your oyster. There's like a million things any high school student could participate in, and sometimes that can create extra pressure because some of our kids are doing it all. They play instruments, they play sports, they're participating in other extracurricular activities, they're volunteering, they're thinking about college. So there's extra stuff outside of the things that they're already doing that they feel a responsibility toward. Growth spurts, so hand in hand with hormones, but periods of extra growth can be really stressful for kids, and they don't even really know what's going on, and we don't even really know what's going on. And then all of a sudden, like, you look over and they're 2 feet taller than they were before, and you're like, oh, that's what was going on. So they're growing, so they're exhausted, and it does, and they're probably, some of our kids are in pain, and that's stressful. Social media. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. Again, I could talk about social media and screen time for hours and hours and hours too. But there's other resources. There was just a Screenager. Yeah, I didn't get to go to it, but I heard some amazing things about it. So we won't spend a ton of time talking about that, but I will just move forward assuming that we know, and we'll touch on this a little bit in a little bit, assuming that we know the challenges that come with this ever available internet and these screens that can essentially be attached to our faces at all times, even during the school day. So okay, I'm going to let you chit chat with your neighbor. What of these things on the list have you already experienced this week? It's only day 2 of this week. So of these things, maybe we could replace academic expectations with, there was sort of job work-related stress. But of these things, what can you relate to even just in the last 2 days? Ready, break.
None on my part. Maybe that's why I've been social media, yeah. I'm a present in our
Just trying to help groundwork your
Yeah, which is some of it. I like
They're really smart.
it's like things that our children are experiencing or it's us. Certainly academic.
All right, what do we think? So I heard someone say that maybe I should have clarified, but the question is for you personally, not your teenager. What of this list of things can you relate to the most? Even just, and maybe have experienced, even just in the last 2 work days? Anybody? Pretty much everything?
Yeah.
So it's for girls first?
We got this.
Yeah, we're having growth spurts. Yeah. Any of them? Any of them? All of them? Yeah.
It's like the family dynamics thing, because we're all going through like preparing for retirement, he's preparing for college, and it's just, there's all these expectations about where it just clashes. I mean,
Yeah.
I clash with my wife about it, she clashes with him about it. It's like, it's this dance of stuff. Because it's like, all of a sudden everything becomes really important and your focus narrows down and you don't see the big picture anymore. And wait a minute, you're not doing this thing I want you to do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because I maybe wouldn't have remembered to touch on, there's this theory in my world, the theory of family systems. And, as individuals, we are a system of systems. It's why I feel so strongly about this mind-body connection and the importance of including both in the discussion when challenges come up. And that system, my individual system of systems is now a part of a bigger system that is my family. And everyone plays a role. It's like a planetary system, right? We're all moving at a certain pace and we have a certain track, and when something shifts, someone retires, someone, breaks their ankle in soccer, or someone, if there's a shift, someone's experiencing a depressed mood, or there's a loss of a loved one, something shifts, then we all kind of like go off kilter and we play off of each other. And then certainly if we're focused on, you know, one thing that kind of gets most of our attention, maybe even, you know, to the detriment of the whole system. And certainly in that case, and in all cases, it's usually the squeakiest wheel gets the attention, and a lot of times that's not even the most urgent issue to be looked at and addressed, right? So I mean, all the time I get parents who, you know, feel like there's something wrong with their kid or their kid needs help, and usually it's like the whole system needs a little bit of a tweaking and adjustment, and the kid is just the loudest wheel on the whole thing. So I'm really glad you said that. So one of the things I hear really often from teenagers is that they feel like their parents don't get it. But you just told me that in any given day you experience all of these things, so you do really get it. And I think one of the things that we forget, I forget it all the time, because you know my teenager is the squeakiest wheel, and so I forget to tell them what's happening with me. And it is a balance. I know, you know, for good reason, we are concerned that we're not burdening our children with adult matters and, you know, our problems, but especially for teenagers, so I'm speaking, you know, particularly for these freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors who are really just, you know, days away from kind of being out on their own, many of them. It's really important that they see what it looks like for an adult to process through challenges and have it not be all about their issues and their problems. So I'm going to try to say that a lot throughout the night, because it is what this night is all about. It really starts with us. So I'm going to challenge you as we're talking about this stuff. I'm going to be talking about our teenagers, but I'm mostly going to be talking about you all, and maybe some of the tweaks and things that we can address with our own physical and mental health, and how and what the interaction is there. And I promise you that will, especially if you're having discussions about those things within your family system, that will bleed into your kids. More is caught than taught at this age. I can't say that enough. It's almost like nothing is taught at this age from parents. That just tends, that's not always the case, but again, remember, I'm trying to make this as widely relatable as possible. More is caught, almost all is caught and taught. So they aren't listening. I hear all the time, like, keep talking, your kids really are listening, and in some senses they are, but really they're watching. And there's this certain age, and lots of people will disagree with me, but it's from my experience and with working with a lot of other people's kids too, but in my experience there's like an age where their ears kind of get muted and they stop hearing as much. Like my daughter, when she was 8, had a very different filter for listening to the things that I had to say than she does now as a 13-year-old. But she is watching and paying attention to what I'm doing. So if I'm sitting, I have kids in my office, and if I ask them what their parents think about drugs, they will tell me what drugs their parents did when they were kids and at what age, right? Or if I say, what do your parents think about, what do you eat? What does your mom or dad make for dinner? And, I'll take that back. If I say, how do your parents feel about the way that you're eating, they will tell me what their parents eat. So so I'll say it again, more is caught than taught, right? So I'm gonna ask you to resist the urge to be, filtering all the stuff that we're talking about tonight through, how it, how it fits your kid, and try to force yourself to break out of that box and think about, what shifts that you can make within yourself, and then communicate that to your kids and model that to your kids. And it will be a lot more effective than anything else. So if you remember nothing else from tonight, the first step, maybe the best step in taking care of your kids, is taking care of yourself. It really does start with you. So if you have a burned out, anxiety-ridden, exhausted teenager, you are probably burnt out, anxiety-ridden, and exhausted. And whether the chicken or the egg, but it's the family system. And one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to address your own burnout, anxiety, and exhaustion. And then you will have some ways to kind of model. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to try and remember to say this throughout, but then you will have some ways to model for your kids. Like, I had a really stressful day today, and the thing that helps me is to go, sit on the couch and put my headphones in and I listen to this song, and then you go do it. And, or I, just got in an argument with your mom, and I'm, we're not seeing things eye to eye, and so I'm going to take a walk around the block and, try to imagine what it is she was trying to communicate to me, right? Instead of like, stop fighting with your sister, and like, why are you so depressed? Get out of bed, right? It doesn't work, and maybe some of us are already kind of figuring that out. More is taught than is caught, and really all of this starts with you. That there's a lot of pressure, perhaps, when you're reading that, but really that's a beautiful thing, because we can do very little about the choices that other people make. And we're probably, some of us who have teenagers are really learning this, that like we used to be able to kind of control and navigate and sort of direct the choices that our kids made, and about this high school age, we start to slowly see that influence kind of dissipate. So though this may be stressful and a lot of pressure, I don't mean it to be so. It can be really kind of a beautiful relief that if we start to take care of ourselves and model that and be really direct about modeling that, actively modeling it, pointing it out, and then our kids will start to pick up on that. And it really works. I've seen it. So, MindBody. I had the hardest time. I don't know if any of you have done this before, but I don't do this very often, this kind of setting, this presentation setting. I'm like really good with one person sitting on the couch across from me, or maybe a family. Like that's kind of my sweet spot. But so as I was building this presentation, I came up with the outline, like, I don't know, 2 months ago. And I was like, okay, this is kind of generally what I'm going to talk about. And then when I went to like sit down and, think about what exactly I should highlight, it was really hard. So there's so much to be said about the mind-body connection, and I'm going to kind of try to fly through it a little bit for the sake of time, and I'm assuming that we kind of have an understanding about the relationship, and maybe I'm sort of taking advantage of the place that we live, and I've lived other places, and so I'm really clued into the uniqueness of this community. But if any of you want to have deeper, conversations about this, or at any kind of greater length, I would love it. But we're not going to do that tonight. So, but very briefly, mind-body, body-mind, there's a dual relationship there, like a dual connection. The physiopsychology, so from the what we do in our bodies and how that affects the mind, and the psychophysiology, how the mind affects the body. That's kind of the breakdown. So I'm going to ask you to humor me and do a little exercise. If you don't mind, you don't have to, but if you want to close your eyes, that would be great. So close your eyes. This is an exercise in imagination. I want you to, in your mind, go to your refrigerator, open it up, reach down and grab a lime from the drawer. Take it out of the fridge, put it on a cutting board, grab a sharp knife, and slice it right down the middle. And kind of squeeze it a little bit, squeeze half of it in your hand, and you can see the juices are bubbling up and the seeds have kind of come to the surface. And imagine yourself taking a big lick of the lime. So your salivary glands, you can open your eyes. There should be some movement there. Yes? Yeah, I can feel it. It's like, yeah, there is no question that there is a connection and a relationship between the mind and the body. We can elicit reactions in our bodies just with our imagination. And imagination, you know, is linked to perception and, you know, how we view the world. Our brains really are like puzzle solvers. Everything to our brains is a giant puzzle, and so we're always looking for those pieces to connect. And a lot of times we end up making up stories in a very healthy way. This is a sort of required function of our brain. But we sort of make up stories about the world, and that has, you know, we have to use our imaginations, and our imaginations have a very powerful impact on our physical bodies and the responses in our bodies. So this idea is, you know, dates way back to like the 2nd century. I mean, this is not a new idea. A lot of traditional medicine models follow this, but probably only in the last 30 years or so has this been really, I guess maybe intently researched, and really the social community has bought into this idea a lot faster than the scientific community. And now, and probably even in the last 10 years, which in the scientific community is not long at all, are we really starting to finally have some good quality research around its relationship. And it's really benefiting the therapeutic world in the field of psychology and psychiatry in kind of a remarkable way. So a couple of examples that I'm going to kind of breeze through. Exercise and emotional regulation. Make sure I'm not skipping anything. I know, I would say 9 out of every 10 teenagers that I see are presenting with pretty remarkable anxiety. Some with panic disorders, anxiety that kind of comes out of nowhere, or panic attacks that seemingly come out of nowhere, or generalized anxiety disorders is probably the number one disorder that I diagnose. And I don't know if I said this in the beginning, but one of my primary, the primary population I work with is teenagers and young adults and their families. And so it's unlikely that, anxiety coupled with depression, but anxiety hasn't touched your home. And anxiety really is just a label. It doesn't really give us, diagnoses tend to be kind of that label that don't necessarily give us, they're not intended to be very descriptive. So it can look a lot of different ways. But there was a study, I think I found this in the research. I have references for all of these if any of you are interested. I have the articles, but this came from the, I think it was the Journal of Psychiatric Research. Dr. Michael Ott is one of the kind of founding researchers in this relationship between exercise and mental health. And he found that just 20 minutes of exercise, this might not be surprising to any of you, but 20 minutes of exercise increased blood circulation to the brain and decreased wasted energy spent, particularly in teens, spent fretting, the kind of general baseline of worry. So just 20 minutes.
Is that like a daily recommendation?
20 minutes a day. Yeah. I will talk a little bit more specifically. I think 15 minutes, in probably less than a month for most, has, a noticeable impact on emotional regulation and the reduction of generalized anxiety. Same thing with depression. There was an article called Outwalking Depression. This was really interesting. They did, one group all of the participants in this particular study had tried at least two different trials of medication, of antidepressant medication, and did not respond to the medication. And so they put the entire group, they split the group, and half of the participants continued with a third antidepressant medication. Actually, all of the participants participated with a third, and some of them it had been a fourth or fifth trial. And then half of the group was assigned to walking 30 to 45 minutes a day. So all of them were taking an antidepressant, half of them were walking every day. 30 to 45 minutes is not a short walk, but they were walking. In the study, so of the patients who received only medication, no average changes in about 12 weeks' time. And then there was clear improvement in those seen in exercise, with 10 out of 19 patients showing a response and some even full remission from their symptoms. So in just 3 months. And I've seen this over and over again, that kids, kids tend to be super active. I mean, in early childhood, we all envy their energy, and so we think that they're just, giant, little tiny bundles of energy that we wish we had. And as kids get older, if they're not participating in sports, which that comes with its own set of stressors, right? But the kids who are not participating in sports, they tend to get very little exercise. We've lost, physical education in many of our schools. I don't know, is there PE? I guess they can take electives, yeah, but some of them don't have them. And so some kids will, very quickly go from being fairly active to middle school, and definitely by high school, where certain seasons even, they're spending very little time moving. So I've seen it over and over again by implementing even just walking. So we're not talking, kids don't have to play sports to get these benefits, and sometimes it's not a good idea for kids to play sports and try to get the benefits, because they can be so stressful for certain kids depending on the sport and depending on the kid. But implementing regular daily movement, a yoga class, walking around the block a few times, walking the dog, swimming, it's shocking how quickly that helps.
We have a 14-year-old daughter who's always been really intense, and she just recently, in the last month probably, started in the morning after she gets up, and then when she gets home from school or at bedtime, just doing like 15 minutes on her computer, like a YouTube thing or whatever.
Like a
and
a
sometimes
video?
it's just a video. Sometimes it's just legs, sometimes it's yoga, and she is so much easier to live with. She's just so moody and
That's
so
amazing.
intense. We're all like,
Do something.
I highly recommend that.
Yes, and it is kind of one of the beauties. We're gonna talk about this in a second, but I say go with what works. If you've got a kid that's like addicted to YouTube videos, then that is a great place to start, is channeling some of that. Did she come up with that on her own?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
And I think part of the year, she did some research on mood and things like that. And so,
Awesome.
and at first I was like, okay, is this like 14-year-old girl, like exercise, like I need to be thin? And then it totally wasn't. So that was a
Yeah.
relief.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah.
amazing. I appreciate that. Okay, this was the one that I had the hardest time staying away from because it's so complex and dynamic, but it doesn't have to be that complex or dynamic. So there is an avenue between the gut, the neurons at the end of the intestines up to the limbic system in the brain that communicates constantly. And so things like serotonin and tryptophan and things that we kind of expect are, moods and would be directly related to the brain start in the gut. 95% of serotonin is produced in the gut. So this is really interesting. We could really get into a discussion about comfort foods and sugar addictions, right? And then, serotonin, the uptake of serotonin in the brain, knowing that it starts in the gut, it's like my brain exploded when I first learned that. It's like, oh, that's why like sugar is, compared to cocaine. It's like we have to have it because it feels so good and it starts right in our guts. It's pretty amazing. Elevated cortisol and adrenaline levels, stress hormones, so which are secreted, that process starts in the brain, but has a remarkable impact on the body. Chronic high cortisol levels or stress hormones, reduce function in hearts, our risk for heart disease increases. There's body weight issues. Joint pain is directly related to high levels of stress hormones. So this pathway is, is ever functioning, ever working, multi-dynamic. This was really cool. This was a research article that I just found in kind of preparing for this. It's something I kind of understood, but there was a study, and I won't go into it, it was kind of a complicated study, but they found that the genetics that we understand as, contributing to certain precursors or making us more susceptible to certain things are completely modifiable by diet. So we are functioning with a set of genetics, and those genetics are still responsive to changes in the diet. So this particular study kind of outlined the traditional diet, so nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, meat. The Western diet, which is, any guesses? What's that? Meat and potatoes, and even fish. Fast food, junk food, processed foods, highly processed foods. And then the modern diet, which is sort of like, it's our modern finessed way of combining all of those things. We still eat lots of vegetables, but we eat it on our pizza. Or, we eat gluten-free, but it's, like a gluten-free pastry that, has loads of sugars and fats.
So we cheat.
So, well, yeah, we kind of like, it's like the best of both worlds. Is what they, sort of how they identified the modern diet. And they found that, this will be no surprise to you, that the Western diet, folks who are on the Western diet were, had notably higher risk of mental health disorders, particularly depression and anxiety. And it was the folks on the traditional diet that were associated with the reduced odds. So they had less than average risk levels for mental health disorders. So this is stuff that like really makes me happy. I could talk about this forever. And I'd be happy to share some of the research with you. And as you're writing too, on the back of those, if you are using some of the note sheets that I provided, on the back of those are a list of resources. I just kind of picked my favorites and the ones that I most used for this presentation. But I have lots more, and I'm happy to share those with you as well. I was debating sharing this, but I think I'm going to. Do we have any podcast themes in here? So there's the Joe Rogan one, which I actually haven't listened to at all, and then a friend of mine was like, you have to listen to this episode. Chris Kresser, anybody know Chris Kresser? Anyone know that name? That's one that's on that page, and if you are at all interested in this topic beyond this, Chris Kresser is a great one. He's really a activist for integrative medicine, and occasionally he does presentations. Sections in his recent book talks about that kind of conjunction between mental health and physical health. But so he tells this story, and I'm going to play it for you.
Could be directly related to gut biome, gut
Absolutely.
bacteria, and you might be able to nip it in the bud with a change in diet, with addressing the sedentary lifestyle, rigorous exercise,
So let me tell you.
rest, all these things. I mean,
Yeah.
it
You hear it
seems
okay?
like what you're prescribing, like, oh, come on, it can't be that easy.
Let me tell you a story. It's actually the first chapter in my book. It's about a kid named Leo that I treated in my clinic a few years back. He was 8 years old when he came to see me. His parents were like a wreck when they came to the office because they were just totally worn down. He would throw these epic tantrums where he'd be, screaming and crying and writhing on the floor for just the most random stuff, like trying to get his shoes tied as they were going out the door, or not cutting the crust off his bread sandwich in just the right way, or getting a stain on his favorite T-shirt. He had a super limited diet. He ate only a handful of foods, all of them processed and refined, like toaster waffles, bread, crackers, cookies, etc. They were concerned about nutrient deficiency, but every time they tried to introduce a different food, he would go ballistic. And they didn't have the energy to fight him at every meal. He was really rigid about his behavior and environment, so like everything had to be just right. If the toys in his room weren't arranged in just the right way, he'd fly off the handle. The desks in his classroom, weren't just the right way, he'd fly off the handle. He was really anxious in unfamiliar environments, so it was hard for them to leave the house for even a few hours, much less travel or go on vacations. I mean, this seems extreme, but there are a lot of kids with these kinds of behavioral disorders now. He was not, he's not alone. So they took him to see doctors locally, and they started with a primary care doctor, then went to psychiatrists, and then several behavioral disorder specialists, actually down here at USC or UCLA. And, first diagnosed on the autism spectrum, then eventually OCD and something called sensory processing disorder, which is like on the autism spectrum where they're really sensitive to, sense, input, touch, sound, etc. So the doctors, they were relieved at first to have these diagnoses, but very quickly it became apparent that they were just labels for the symptoms. It wasn't anything that actually gave them information about what to do. And then when they asked the doctor what the treatment was, the answer was medication. So they first started with Adderall, which you mentioned earlier, then Ritalin, both stimulants, and then eventually antidepressants, which again have not really been approved as safe or effective in kids. And they did help at least a little bit with some of the symptoms, but then he got a lot of brutal side effects, gut pain, dry mouth, irritability, headaches, and the worst thing was severe sleep disruption. And he had 2 younger brothers and sisters, so his parents definitely didn't need more of that. And the crazy thing throughout this entire period, not one of his doctors even hinted at the possibility that something in its diet or like disrupted gut microbiome or nutrient deficiency could even be contributing to his symptoms. Nobody even brought that up. And that's not the exception, that's the rule. So, you know, his parents weren't thrilled about, I mean, they weren't thrilled about medicating him, but they did it because they had no other option. And nobody suggested that it could be anything other than just, you know, something wrong with their son. But fortunately, one of his mom's friends sent a couple articles for my blog. One was on the gut-brain axis, which we've been talking about. Another was on all of the underlying causes of behavioral disorders in kids. So they brought him to my clinic. We did a whole bunch of testing, as I do with all my new patients. And not surprisingly, we found he had a disrupted gut microbiome. He had SIBO, bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine. He had non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and gluten was in almost every food he was eating. But he also had intolerance of some other proteins like dairy and soy and corn and buckwheat, which were in the toaster waffles he was eating every night. He had deficiencies of vitamin D, B12, folate, and iron because he was eating just flour, basically, you know, flour and sugar. And he had high levels of arsenic, which is a heavy metal, because the only other beverage he would drink aside from water was rice milk. And rice milk's been shown to have, you know, higher levels of arsenic. So if a kid's just pounding rice milk, they could actually start to develop levels of arsenic that could be problematic.
That's crazy because a lot of people think of rice milk as being
as a healthy beverage, right?
Yeah.
But so we started treating him, which wasn't easy because of his OCD-like tendencies. It was really hard to get him to change his diet. So we just started focusing just on those mechanisms that I talked about, getting him some more nutrients and treating his gut and dealing, you know, trying to get some of those things out of his food. Initially just switching those brands of toaster waffles so that at least they were made from stuff that he wasn't clearly reacting to, and then gradually over time shifting. Within several weeks, he was having fewer tantrums. He was less set off by the things that would have done that before. About 4 months into the treatment, his teacher called home from school and was like, "Where's Leo? You know, what have you done with Leo? And who's this guy you're sending to school in his place?" Because it had been horrific for her as his teacher at school, and you know, to the point where his parents often had to come pick him up and bring him home from school because he was so disruptive. Then I talked to Leo's mom maybe 6-7 months into the treatment. By then we had the follow-up test back. A lot of the issues that we set out to address had been resolved. His diet had expanded significantly. He was eating foods that he would have thrown against the wall just a few months before. He was more tolerant, you know, more affectionate, less controlling and rigid, and just better adjusted kid overall.
Yeah, so that's kind of amazing. And that those stories like that we hear, I hear all the time. And I in one of my courses, so I started teaching at the U of O about 4 years ago. And at the time, the research was that less than 3% of medical schools in the US even offered a course on nutrition for their doctors. Now it's almost up to 30% that they offer. The recommendation is that they take 25 credits worth of nutrition courses, but it's a recommendation and it's not a requirement, and not quite 30% of U.S. medical schools even have those courses available. So it's not that our doctors don't care, but they don't have the education, and especially folks that were in school a number of years ago, you know, they maybe didn't at all. So there's this kind of new drive to get this information, and again, we live in a community where we do have physicians that have these resources and have the education to provide, but you know, we could get into a lot of that. But there's plenty of things. You don't really need our doctors to. We don't need Chris Kresser doctors necessarily. You can get this information. You can do blood panels pretty easily, conveniently, and at a fairly low cost. And there's lots of practitioners in this town. Our town is saturated with really great therapists, nutritionists, health coaches, There's like a wealth of information in our town and in our state and in the Northwest in general. So we have really good access to this information. It just might not be your doctor.
Can I add a little to that?
Yeah.
I'm the medical assistant for North Eugene High School
Okay.
and Churchill High School. And we work in the high schools. We have a health center that's
Yeah.
a school-based health center. And it's, I'm not really doing a plug for the company I work for, but I do phlebotomy, we do lab draws, we do all kinds of labs, and they're for kids who are privately insured and publicly insured, through OHP and
Yeah.
Trillium. And so we're able to help out only our 4J kids. So that's all the high schools, that's all the middle schools, that's all elementary schools.
So other 4J kids could go to
Yes.
Churchill or North.
Yes.
We should talk.
Yes, we should. And we have Lane County Behavioral Health there
Yes.
too. So it's not only medical, it's
Okay.
behavioral health as well.
That's so great to know. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so quick discussion. I will only make you talk for a little bit because we're going to wrap up here pretty soon. Examples in your own life. You shared about your daughter and the kind of shift and change made just doing a little bit of exercise and movement in the morning and in the evening. Anything else? Has anyone ever noticed? I mean, we could maybe we'll skip the table discussion and see if it works to get anybody brave enough. Just, I tried this and this happened, or, we were dealing with this and then got tested and realized, yeah.
It's amazing what happens when you take your phones away from your kids.
Phones away from the
You
kids.
get them back.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second.
How do you do that? That's one question.
How do you do that?
I work for Roosevelt, and we take away the phones from kids that are using it during the daytime because they're not allowed to. And I can't tell you how many parents are calling me back and saying, "What did you do when you took it away?" And I said, "He got upset." "Well, what did you do?" "Well, he can be upset as much as he wants, but it's against the rules. I took it away." And they asked me for advice. How do I take it away? And I said, "You just take it." "Yeah, but he bought it with his own money, or he got it for birthday present, whatever." And I also said, if you find a kid, having wine in their room, you take it away because they're not supposed to have it, even if you use their own money. You just take it away. They're going to be upset, but
Have you had any parents ever ask you to give it back to them?
no.
Because
Last year I talked to over 200
I'm
parents.
surprised, but some of
Over
them
200
almost
parents.
like that those phones are like a
No.
bloodline to the kids.
No, I've had parents call and said, "Can you keep it for a week?" So it's a big thing, and after we were going to do it for a couple of weeks, and I think we did it for 3 months, a whole summer last year. And he admitted to us that, yeah, you know what, I started looking out the window, driving a car, I wasn't like always playing games. I started looking around and be more aware of my environment.
Yeah.
It's a big.
I
And you
will
noticed how much his friends were.
Yeah, he noticed his
Oh.
friends how addicted they were to it.
Yeah. I will say, for most of us, it might be a little bit easier to take the phone away when you don't have to live with them. Right? Or you don't have to, right? Because maybe there's the familiarity and the whole family system, when we talk about that, we have to deal with it, right? In a different way than, teachers or administration has to deal with it. But, you did it.
The first 3 days was hell.
Yeah.
I gotta admit that.
Yeah.
The fourth day, I sent my son. We sent our son to a friend for a 2-day sleepover, and then he came back and he was kind of more normal.
Yeah. It is really hard. I have some suggestions for taking the phones away. Sometimes baby steps. So I'll talk about this in a second, but baby steps, no phones in the room at nighttime. We started there, and this all just kind of hit us. We're all in this together. This came out of nowhere, that the phones were a thing. It seemed to me, that it just kind of came out of nowhere. So we really didn't have the structure. We know so much now, but we didn't really know when iPhones first came out, or smartphones, first came out, that it was going to turn into this thing. The connections that are being made, between, the increased accessibility to social media and screen time and, the influx of mental health issues, I think it took us by surprise, and it happened really fast. But so baby steps is one of my biggest suggestions. If you're not in crisis, if you're in crisis, then throw the phone into the lake. But if you're not in crisis and you have the luxury of a little bit of time, then baby steps and start with no phones in the room.
I think parents should set a good example for the kids and not use it around them when they won't let the kids do it.
Yeah, so we plug our phones in the kitchen, and my phone is in there in the kitchen before I go to bed. And that's new. It didn't start out being that way. It was like their rule. And then, like I'm supposed to, like I'm talking about it starts with you, and we set an example, and so and it is hard, and no phones at the table, or like look at me when I'm talking to you, like it's not just our kids, like we do it too. So, and it is our phone, and we bought it with our own money, so we have a good excuse, but it doesn't work. Okay, so now what? So this is the part that, again, there's just so many things that I could recommend, and I tried to pick the ones that might be the most helpful. But if we need to talk about this more, of course, I'm happy to do that. So one of the things I pretty much always do, maybe I always do it without exception, it's something that I kind of grew into in my practice, is anytime I sit down with a new patient, I ask them, I get the story, and I hear like what's going on and see what the presentation is and the symptoms are. And, at the end of the first session, I always ask the patient to play therapist. You pretend you're a therapist. What do you think is going on? And what are the top 3 things that if you started implementing now, you think might help? And they always know. Like, I never have anyone say, I don't even, they might not know where to start, and they might not know how to take away the phone, right? But they always know that these 3 things, they can always give me a list of at least 3 things. And there's something to that. I think we have the capacity to really self-evaluate, and you can strengthen that kind of emotional maturity to be able to kind of recognize the challenges and what some of the solutions would be. So really trusting your gut on what might be helpful, you're probably right. And I know there's a lot of, I'm not talking myself out of a job here, in that it is really helpful to have professionals and people around you to support and encourage and motivate, and I know that's really helpful. But just know that you probably know, more than you might think if you're not thinking about it, right? So start with what you know will work. So if you know that the phone is an issue, then let's talk about how to reduce the backlash of the phone. If you know that, my kid is skipping lunch most days, then that's probably a really great place to start. If you know that you or your kid, or maybe both of you, are not getting enough sleep, then that's a really great place to start. So trust your gut. Do an evaluation. If I was a therapist or a doctor, what would be the first 3 things that I would, where I would start? And you're probably right. And all my patients are. Get grounded, but not that kind of grounded. So again, with the mind-body connection, I can't stress enough the impact of grounding exercises every day, like making it a practice. And this does not have to be, a huge ordeal. It doesn't have to be an hour of yoga every day. It can really be 90 seconds of tempo breathing exercises before your feet hit the floor. Yeah, we're going to do this. So if you could take a deep breath with me. Now real slowly, I want you to think of 3 things that you hear. And then, without moving your body too much, 3 things you see. And then 3 things you feel. Do you feel a fan? Can you feel the seat beneath you? Can you feel your shirt scratching your elbow? And take another big deep breath through your belly, in your belly button, and let it out real slowly. And then we'll do it again. 3 things you see. It's better if you make them 3 different things. 3 things you hear. And 3 things you feel. That's so good. Right? So this is, if you do that 3 times every morning, after 6 weeks, you will notice a difference. What we're doing is there's so much competition in our brains for attention, right? And again with the phones, but there's even, digital competition like very far outside of real time competition for our attention. And so we tend to go way into the future or, feel things way far from the past. And doing those centering and grounding exercises, really focusing, honing in on the senses, the touch, the sound, the taste, the feel, the sight, disconnects us from everything out here and keeps us very present. We're like elongating the window between trigger, something that's upsetting, something that's worrisome, something that's anxiety inducing, something that's angering, and we're training our brains to stay present with that long enough to make a decision about how we're going to respond instead of like a snap response, right? So, which stress tends to shorten that window of time before, if you've ever I don't know why I just said that, or, it's not like me to just snap at my kid like that, or teenagers are very much, they're like born with this window, right? And they don't have the brain developed. Do we know what the average age of a fully developed brain is? What is it? Yeah, it's really probably closer to 28 for males, and about 25 or 26 for females. So how many of us had kids before our brains were done developing? So, for the rest of our lives, one of our primary goals is elongating that window between trigger. And I don't mean trigger necessarily in that it's something super negative, but trigger in something happens and this is how I'm going to respond. And so that's true of something that's depressing or anxiety-inducing. Training our brain outside of stimulus. So before we get out of bed or right before we go to bed is the time to do that. Sleep. Get enough of it. How much is enough sleep for a teenager? Any ideas? What's that?
8 to 10.
8 to 10. Yeah, I think the recommendation is 10 for most teenagers, especially if if they're very physically active. Then 8 to 10. So if you are doing the math in your head and it's more like 7, that is one of the first places I start, because it is one of the most easily fixable challenges. So as annoying as it might be to let your kids sleep in until 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday, if they're not getting enough sleep, I think there's about a 48 to 72 hour window where you can actually catch up on sleep. So if, towards the end of the week your kid is racking only 6 or 7 hours of sleep in a night, and they're able to sleep in on the weekend, then I highly recommend it. And for you also, adults, what's the recommendation? We always say 8 hours, but yeah, 7.5 would be huge. 9 would be amazing.
16.
16 and then something might be wrong. Hydrate. So get enough water. What's enough water? You know?
2 liters, 8 glasses.
Yeah.
If you don't exercise.
2 liters, 8-ounce glasses. Any other recommendations? Anybody? Here's my problem, and this is becoming more accepted with the 8x8 rule, the 8-ounce glasses of water. I probably don't have the same hydration needs as a 300-pound linebacker, right? So if I drink 8-ounce glasses of water, that might be enough. It's probably not enough for someone who of that size, who's exercising like they are, right? So a better recommendation is something that's a little bit more bio-individuality friendly, and that would be half your body weight in ounces of water a day. So if you weighed 150 pounds, that would be 75 ounces of water every day. Now that's not including folks who are really active and are kind of major sweaters. So for every pound lost, so if you've got a teenager that is exercising all the time, you know, if they play football or basketball or, and, you know, it might be helpful to, and you start to notice that like maybe they're, you know, dehydrated, it might be helpful to do a weigh-in before and after rigorous exercise. For every pound, there should be at least 4 ounces of water added to that.
I always tell my kids to drink until your urine's light yellow.
Yes.
Pale yellow.
Yeah, your pee should not be dark yellow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a problem. And front loading it. So like start with a glass of water first thing in the day. I mean, our bodies are 60% water. Our brains and hearts are about 75% water. So we can't expect it to function being constantly dehydrated. And it's too late. You're already dehydrated when you're thirsty. So let that sink in. You're already dehydrated once you get noticeably thirsty. So when your lips are dry, or your like muscle cramps, like you're dehydrated, and it usually takes about 24 hours to regain hydration once you're fully dehydrated. So there's so much really great information on emotional regulation and hydration. I mean, and this is something we can all do. Like, of all the things we could fight with our kids about, we could probably get them to drink an extra glass of water. So it's like maybe a great place to start, and hugely impactful. Eating well. This is, what's eating well? Whole food. That's great. That's a great answer. That's still like a complex answer, right? This is tough. I would say when it comes to knowing what eating well really means, start somewhere. This is another baby steps thing, and this is another trusting your gut thing. If you could, you know, if there was some, like maybe breakfast in your house is, you know, a mad rush. Maybe you and your kids aren't getting breakfast, or if you are, it's like a toaster strudel or something like that, and you're like feeling like maybe that's not great, then start there. Like forget about lunch and dinner, start with breakfast, and maybe don't get rid of the processed whatever it is, but maybe just add in, you know, like you can eat the processed thing, but you gotta have a piece of fruit and you get to pick it. In my house, we have something green at every meal, but the kids get to pick it. So they stuff spinach in their sandwich, and they're probably eating it. Who knows? But I'm modeling, and we're setting an example even at breakfast. So we do smoothies, and kale hides remarkably well in smoothies. You cannot taste it. You can see it, but you can't taste it. So, you know, my kids will go for that. So I don't, I have one really picky eater and one that will eat anything. And so with a really picky eater, we just have an understanding. He gets to pick what the vegetable is, but it has to be green in every meal. And I picked green because because I know he likes raw spinach, like that's the thing that he picks, so good enough for me, right? So start small and then build on top of it. He eats he has a lot more variety in his diet now than he did even 4 years ago. Let me see if I wanted to say anything about that. Right, how are we doing? Move. So there's so much beautiful research now about even a minimum of 15 minutes of movement a day after about 6 weeks having a noticeable impact on mental health particularly. So again, it can be a YouTube video, it can be a 15-minute walk, but it really does need to become a daily practice. So to see the benefits over a short amount of time. I still think get it when you can, but there is the structure of making it a practice and building it into your daily life is also part of the brain training that goes on, and the body starts to crave it, and then it's it's 30 minutes, or it's a yoga class, or it's Zumba, or whatever, and you start to see. This is also another one that I start with a lot in my practice, that because it's like the big bang for your buck kind of thing. Like, it doesn't take much and it doesn't take long, and you see some really great things really quickly. And then call in reinforcements. Issues and challenges are addressed, resolved, and healed in community, not in isolation. There is no handbook for parenting. There's really, there's like a million handbooks for parenting, but there's no like real handbook for you parenting your kid, right? So they're really, like I said, this town is saturated with amazing therapists. There's a number of really great doctors in town, nurse practitioners. We have the programs, we have the gyms, we have the facilities. We really do have a really rich community, and we should all access it in some way. And it doesn't have to be bought all the time. South's counseling department, your kids all have their advisors. Now we know of this program at Churchill and North that all of our kids have access to. There's a lot of really great resources. I tried to name some of them. There's Eugene Therapy in town is just a really great place to start. They are fed by the university, and I think there's 3 universities in Eugene alone that are pumping out therapists. So there's like an ever-growing community. I think I put Eugene Therapy and maybe one other place. The Y right here, if you're looking for a place to get some movement or exercise, and I did not get paid to do this, but and also Willamette Lane out in Springfield, like there are facilities around where you can get a lot of family activity in and doing things together, so that you're modeling and not just talking at your kids. So and then really kind of creating a community with other parents is so great. We have our boys play basketball together, and I don't have the same thing with my daughter that I have with the boys, that I have I'm friends with all my son's friends' parents. And that happened by accident, but I'm finding that I'm trying to do it on purpose with my daughter's friends, because it's really kind of, we kind of sort of joke that my son has 5 or 6 mothers, because if he gets away with something with me, someone else is going to catch it, right? And so there's a community, and I've many times called a couple of them and traded kids for the day. I took their son and they took mine, and so there's kind of a beauty, which also sort of decreases the tension of that need for autonomizing. It's like I need to autonomize from my parent, but I don't necessarily need to autonomize from all adults. And it's another thing to model that we're kind of all doing it together, and the kids really pick up on that. And so far they don't hate us for it. I think they kind of love it. So I think that's everything. Are there any questions? I know that's a lot of information crammed into 90 minutes, but I do appreciate the giving me this platform to talk about something that I really love. And I'm happy to, I think my email is on the bottom of that note page, and that is the best way to get a hold of me since I'm usually in with patients most of the day. But I'm happy to send research articles where I got a lot of this information, or answer questions, or direct resources. I'm happy to connect, especially with my fellow SAL parents. Yeah.
You did say that you were going to make some comments about detoxing from smartphones.
Oh, detoxing from smartphones. Okay, yes. So I would, thank you. So under that sleep component, so a couple of recommendations about sleep beyond how many hours you're getting is many of us don't just fall asleep when our heads hit the pillows, and our teenagers are the same way. So there is a growing body of evidence around setting up sleep hygiene, and one of those things. So sleep hygiene, a sleep routine, is another kind of term for it. That you do the same things prior to bedtime every night, so it slowly starts to signal to your body and brain that you're about to go to sleep. Some people will read or light a candle or take a shower or drink a cup of tea, or there's various things. You can set it up kind of however you want, but one of the key components of that is no blue light inside of an hour. Some recommend 2 hours, but baby steps. No blue light inside of an hour prior to sleep. So that's television, certainly cell phones, this close to your face. And part of that is that the brain processes that stimulus for a long time after we shut it off. So we're not really wired for this electric, blue light thing. And so our body is our brains are still trying to figure it out, even, because we haven't, these things have only been around for not that long. So we haven't adapted to be able to be done processing that information just because the phone goes off or the TV goes off. We're still going with that information long after the input is over. So I can't, I'm not hard-nosed about a lot of things. I think my kids would disagree. But I'm really, there is no exception. The phones do not belong in your bed. It's just for lots of reasons, but if we're just talking about sleep, we're really interfering, during sleep, that's when our body repairs, that's when, some of those neural connections are really cemented, especially as teenagers and the growing brain. That is a non-negotiable, that I'm not going to mess with my kids' development in that way. So that's, as far as reducing and minimizing the sleep time or the screen time, then if you start anywhere, I would start there. Plug your phone in the kitchen before bed, and an hour before bed. Yeah.
I'm sorry if you said this, but did you address blue light filters? Just because kids are doing homework up until bedtime?
Yeah.
On the computer, because it's on the computer.
Yeah. I didn't talk about that. I think the jury's still out on how effective those blue light filters really are. There's the glasses, the lenses. My guess I can't really speak to this with any history or experience. My guess is that they probably work a little bit, and they probably help. It's probably better than nothing. But it's also not, it addresses the blue light, but it doesn't really address the discipline and the routine and the self-care aspect of not, like working and stressing and then trying to go to bed. I don't know how many of us can just do that, but kids maybe can do it a little bit better, but we outgrow that, and then once we're adults and we can't do that anymore, we don't really have the system or the neural setup to moderate for that. Then we're dealing with insomnia and sleep disorders and stuff. So I in our house, there have been exceptions to this, but for the most part, we go to bed and we get up early if we still have something to work on. But there's like at 9 o'clock it all goes off, and then everybody's usually in bed by 10. So that's kind of, I'm stretching that now because I've got an almost 16-year-old and that's not flying. but that's been the rule, is 9 o'clock and then in bed by 10. So does that help?
There's, I've been working in the cell phone industry for 9 years now, and the iPhone, or smartphone, came about in 2007. So it's been 10 years and a few months since we've been introduced to this. And what I found, parents who want to buy their kids smartphones, and when should they buy it, and how should they buy it, and what type of phone they should buy. You got to know your kid, and are they addicted to video games and computers now at 10? Just imagine if they have this device that they can carry around with them. So you've got to find a way to make a sound decision there, but you can always police it with very basic equipment. Yes, there's routers that can help you to shut the internet off at a certain hour at night, and they can limit where they go in terms of pages that they visit, porn being number one. But outside of that, there's also this little thing that you buy at the hardware store that we used to have that has like the green and the red, and it's a timer, and you plug things into it, and it goes click and it turns off, and then at 7 o'clock in the morning it goes click and it turns on, right? So you could have your internet set that way on your router connected to that day, and at 10 o'clock at night you decide the time, it shuts off. So that phone becomes a dumb phone at 10 o'clock at night. Yeah, and you also get some rest too, because you're not up late doing it yourself.
Yeah. But also one thing that I realized, our kids, it sounds like my son is horrible, but he had a little spit there that he got right when he got it. And we had 5 boys over for sleepover, and they were up and talking, and I realized they were all on the phones. So I took all the phones and I said, you guys are hanging out with each other, you don't need the phones. So I put them all in the charger in the kitchen, and then I heard their little feet up. So then I took all the phone and put it in my bedroom, and all night those phones were going off, notification out of nowhere. So even if they're trying to be good and think, oh, I'm not going to use my phone, but they are social. All their friends are up at 2 in the morning, Snapchatting, and so there's such a big temptation, even if you have a kid, that not necessarily get pulled into that, because some kids are up all night, and if you look at your kid's phone in the morning before they wake up, there's like so many notifications about things, or people posting, or new video, or whatever. So it is such a temptation for them to have it around. So
And I'm gonna just to boost this with a little bit of a silver lining. The beauty of the phone is its currency. It's like you've got something that they care about,
yeah.
And so you've got something to earn. In our house, I check Parent View every morning, and if it's not even this can vary by kid, but in my kid's life, the most important thing is that they're turning in their work. It's not even an issue of grades, but everyone can kind of design that to work best for them. But we had an issue with, they had homework done, and then it just wasn't getting turned in. I think it's the transition from middle school to high school where it didn't matter in middle school and now it matters. But for whatever reason, there was like no motivation to turn in this completed work. So if I see, and the high school teachers are on it, man, you know if they're missing something, which is so amazing. That's also different, I feel like, from middle school. Like we kind of didn't know what was going on, even if we had parent meetings. But in high school, they're on it. So I check every morning, and if there are no zeros, then the phone goes with them to school. And it's like, it's a beautiful, like, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have the phone that they cared about. So it is leverage, it's currency, it's something for them to earn, which is also like a really powerful model of earning things that you have, even behaviorally, earning everything you have. So they're not all bad. They do something for
No,
us.
and you can find my iPhone, you know if something happens to them, you know
Yeah.
where they are.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.